Hi everyone, and welcome to the first video in a long series of videos where I will go through all of the topics needed for biology, Cape Biology Unit 1. Right, so I will be doing all of the topics in these series of videos on YouTube, so you can follow along throughout the syllabus. We'll also explore some past papers, and make sure and subscribe so you wouldn't miss any of them, right? Because we'll be doing the entire syllabus. Alright, so this first video will be a very short one. It's actually on water, and water is the shortest topic in biology. It'll only take a couple of minutes. Right, so what I will do is I will have the notes up here, the very concise 1-page long notes, right? But don't be fooled, there's quite a lot of information in here. Right, so I will give you a chance to screenshot the note now, right? In case that's what you're here for, you just want the notes. And now I will go through and explain the topic in a little more detail, right? So let me just go to a blank page here. Right, so let's explore water as a chemical structure. We know that water has 1 oxygen and 2 hydrogen atoms. Right, and they are arranged basically like this. So let's just see. This is a place for 1 here. Right. So we have 2 hydrogens here, and we have an oxygen atom there. And we will just draw a line here showing that the 2 hydrogens are covalently bonded. Important from chemistry, covalently bonded, which means that they share electrons. And how many electrons are there? There are actually 2. 1, 2, 1, 2 for each bond. Right? Now what makes a bond like this special is that the oxygen atom has a very special characteristic. We call it electronegative. Right? So we see that the oxygen atom is electronegative, meaning that these 2 electrons that they are sharing here, the electrons kind of want to go a little closer to the oxygen atom, both of them, right? Because the oxygen atom likes the electrons. The electrons are more gravitated towards the oxygen atom. Now, remember that an electron is negative, right? Remember, in your atom, the proton is positive, the electron is negative, right? So now, because the electrons are moving towards the oxygen atom, so let me redraw what these oxygen atoms are. The electrons, they're moving more that way, right? Closer to the oxygen atom. This actually gives the oxygen atom a negative charge, but it's not a true negative charge, it's a partially negative charge. So we draw this little delta sign here, and we put a negative charge by the oxygen. Right? That's because the negatively charged electrons are closer to the oxygen atom than the hydrogen atom. Now, if the oxygen atom is negatively charged or partially negatively charged, this automatically makes the hydrogen atom partially positively charged, right? Both of them, right? And why am I explaining this to you? Because of these partially negative and partially positive charges, we call this a hydrogen bond, right? Between any partially positive and partially negative atoms, there's a hydrogen bond there. And this is what gives water all of its amazing properties with respect to the environment and how human beings and also plants and animals use water, right? It's all due to hydrogen bonding, and I'll show you how that is very soon, right? But for now, this is how the chemical structure of water looks. And just for a bonus tip here, that angle between the 2 hydrogen bonds there is actually approximately 120, sorry, why am I saying 120? 105 degrees. Okay, so now let's take a look at how the hydrogen bonds work for water in this wonderful table here. Now, this table might look short, but it actually contains all of the important details that your exam will ask of you for water, right? So the first one is cohesion and surface tension. Very important here, right? So now how does this come about? Well, the hydrogen bonds between the oxygen and the hydrogen hold the molecules together at the water surface, right? So if you have like a body of water here, and this is the water surface here, if you look from above, the water will look very still, right? And this is because the hydrogen bonds actually pull on the water and keep it like a very tight, like a trampoline almost, right? So very light organisms, like pond skaters for example, they can actually walk on water because they are so light that their body does not break these hydrogen bonds. And another note here with hydrogen bonds is that hydrogen bonds are very weak, right? So these bonds are weak, so almost anything would break it. That's why you can't walk on water, right? Any heavy object would break the hydrogen bonds, break the surface tension, and fall through the water. Okay, right. So now how does this help organisms? Well, cohesion and surface tension actually work in plants more than animals, really. So remember, the plants get their water from the roots, right? So how do you think the water moves through the roots, up the stems, and into the leaves? Well, if you could imagine, and this is roots here, and this going on the stem here, the water molecules actually stick to each other and stick to the xylems in the stems and move up that way, right? They have an ability to stick to each other, cohesion, right? And as I told you, some small insects and organisms can actually walk on water, feed on the organisms right below the water, like the pond skaters, right? So this helps them to survive in the environment. Okay, another easy property is that water is a good solvent for polar substances. Like for example, salt and water. Salt dissolves in water, and a lot of other things dissolve in water as well. So how does this happen? Well, polar molecules, for example salt, which is sodium chloride, they are actually attracted to the weak charges on the water molecules, the partially positive and partially negative charges, right? So let's look down here. Right, look at the Cl here and the sodium. So we know the chloride ion is a negative ion and the sodium ion is a positive ion. Now remember, in water we have partially positive and partially negative atoms there. So the chloride ion being negative is actually going to attract the partially positive hydrogen atoms close to it. And the sodium ion being positive is actually going to attract the negative oxygen atoms of the water. Right, so they separate from each other and the water kind of keeps them hidden in between the water. That's why they dissolve and look like there's nothing there. Right, now how does this help organisms? Well, it helps with transport of a lot of substances, right? So sugar molecules especially can dissolve in water and be able to transport throughout the system. Okay, high specific heat capacity. So if you did physics, you would know that water has a relatively high specific heat capacity. So 4.2 joules of energy is needed to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And by doing so, it will break the hydrogen bonds between the molecules and result in the molecules moving faster, getting more kinetic energy, and the temperature will increase. Now, 4.2 joules is a lot of energy, right? So what this means is that the temperature of water is not going to increase by a lot if there's a little bit of energy. You need a lot of energy to do that, right? So remember, organisms are made up of mostly water, which means that the water helps us keep a constant temperature. Remember, we can't function at 1 to 2 to 3 degrees Celsius higher or lower than our optimum temperature, right? So that's why the water protects all organisms from rapid temperature changes. Okay, also the oceans will not undergo rapid temperature changes as well. Look how much water is in the oceans, right? So that will protect the fish and also plants under the sea. Okay, freezing. Now, a very important property of water is that when water freezes, the density actually decreases. This is why ice, when you put ice into a drink, it will float, right? So we don't have a use in organisms for this one, but in the environment, in cold regions, when it's winter time, ponds will freeze over, right? But the entire pond does not freeze. So this is the pond here. Only about this portion would freeze, right? Not the bottom. So all the organisms that were living in the pond will continue to survive under the ice. And the ice is actually a good insulator, right? Which means that the cold is not going to go all the way down to the organisms and cause them to die, right? They can actually survive very well under the ice. Okay, so when you see a lake freezing over, it's just the surface. You will see people falling through the ice and stuff on videos. Okay, high latent heat of vaporization. So there's a large thermal energy needed to change water to vapor. Now we know this, right? We know how much the latent heat of vaporization of water is. Way more than the specific heat capacity. Now what this means is that when we sweat and when plants transpire from transpiration, this is an efficient method for cooling, right? When you sweat or when you pour water or those alcohol solutions on your skin and it evaporates very quickly, you get a very nice cooling sensation, right? This is because when water evaporates, a large amount of heat energy is taken away from your body. And this is a very efficient way to cool the body. Okay? And also, in the environment now, remember there are large lakes, but there are also shallow ponds, right? And there are plants and fishes living in these shallow ponds. Now, if there's a large amount of energy needed to evaporate the water, then in these shallow ponds, the water will not evaporate so quickly that all the water will evaporate and the fish will die. Okay? So that's another use there. And finally, water could actually participate in a lot of reactions, right? So water splits into hydrogen atoms and something called hydroxyl ions. And the major reaction that you need to know is photosynthesis, right? And you will get into the nitty-gritty of photosynthesis in Unit 2. But you know from CSEC that photosynthesis has a light dependent and light independent, and water is needed somewhere in that equation, right? So water is needed for photosynthesis because it's reactive. So it's these 6 properties of water that make it essential for life, and this will form the majority of all the questions on water. We'll be dealing with some amount of properties here. Okay, and really there is nothing much more to tell you on water. So I hope you enjoyed this introductory, very short video in the series of biology, and I hope you stick around for the other topics as well. We'll be doing all of them. Okay, bye everybody.